Hello, everybody.
Only lies cast in a face. There's not one truth cast in a stone.
This is the Cast in Stone podcast.
Only lies cast in a flame. It's time to burn. Burn alive.
I am Bo.
It's time to burn.
This is something I've been wanting to do for a minute and just thought I would take a stab at it. Thank you so much for checking it out. Thank you for bearing with me, as this is kind of my first solo endeavor in this kind of world. I'm just gonna kind of go into my spiel and then we'll get into the whole thing. First and foremost, I would like to kind of say the obvious disclaimer type stuff. I'm not in any way a historian, an authority, an expert, anything like that. These are just the premise of the whole thing is going to be kind of topics and stories throughout time that I think are cool. And not cool in like a glorifying way, cool in like a fascinating way. There's a lot of really terrible stuff that we're going to talk about. But the point of it is I find it fascinating and I like to talk about it and explore it and just kind of do it that way. The show is called Casts in Stone, and I do want to explain that a little bit. Several meanings to the word. First and foremost is just the usual use of the phrase, meaning there are lots of things in the past that are known and concrete and solid and, cast into stone. The second would be because it's a podcast and we're podcasts in stone, a little pun. The third and kind of most important is the way I'm going to kind of tell these stories is like you would tell a screenplay or something like a theater play or a movie script. Not that I'm going to be dramatizing anything at all. I won't be acting in any such way, but I'm going to kind of introduce scenes and the cast of characters and have end credits and blah, 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 because I think that will kind of help me stay focused, but maybe hopefully you stay focused. So it's like a cast, a cast of characters. And lastly, because of the obvious Hatebreed reference, and shout out to Hatebreed, because Not One Truth is one of the best songs ever written. And then a little sidebar here. I am recording this on video. I'm not expecting to put it out necessarily on video, but just in case, I do have visuals. I have some things that I can include. I might put out a video component to this podcast. If that's something you guys are interested in, just let me know. I'm going to edit it all together anyway, but for the start, I'm just going to do audio. But if this is something that's cool, I have maps, I have portraits, I just have some things that are kind of interesting to look at. So I want to do that if, that's something that you're interested in. So that is kind of the show and the premise of the show out of the way. We can move on now to kind of the topic of our episode today. One of the most fascinating things to me is the introduction of a advanced civilization to another advanced civilization. It's one of these ideas that I heard about when I was a kid in school, and I was just always fascinated with when two major cultures and civilizations that are very advanced by their own right meet for the first time, whether they clash or trade or do whatever they do. A lot of time, there's a lot of clashing. When I was doing research for this, I thought this was one of the first major things like this, and then I found out there was lots of stuff going on. This particular one is just the one that has always kind of caught my eye or caught my attention. We're going to talk about the conquest of the New World by the Empire of Spain. This mostly takes place in the late 1400s and early to mid 1500s is kind of the area that we're going to talk about. So something that we need to get out of the way is in no way am I trying to glorify conquests or the Conquistadors or the Spaniards or anything like that. I don't think in any way that it's like cool or badass, and I don't want to like make it come across that way. So I just want to obviously point out the fact that we're talking about some really terrible things, and in no way am I wanting to glorify that. However, that being said, like certain acts in this story are undoubtedly courageous and took a lot of will and a lot of bravery. And, courage and righteousness are not necessarily linked. So we're gonna keep that in mind. We're gonna kind of just talk about like the facts. I think we all know what's wrong, what's right, or we have a vague idea or whatever. I'm not really gonna explore that. We're gonna talk about the things that we are told that happen. The most interesting thing to me about this is it's almost as close as we can get to like an alien civilization landing here. I'm in America. It would be like a super advanced civilization landing in what we consider to be an advanced civilization. And you just kind of go, oh, you guys are fucking from the sky. You're gods or whatever. We'll get to that. But that's what fascinates me about this so much is it's almost like an alien civilization landing on Earth. And there's not too many of those in, the history, in known history. One of the most frustrating things about history and trying to figure out what I was going to do with this is there's really no way to tell an entire story because the dominoes for events that are linked stretch forever. You can kind of link something to anything else. So I'm just going to kind of pick a time frame and I'm going to end at a certain point that I think is appropriate and start at a certain point that I think is appropriate. And that's just kind of how it is. So there's not really going to be like a resolve to this. It's not really very nice or fun, but it's interesting. And I think because it's interesting, there's merit into, learning about this. So we're going to move on to that's the disclaimer portion of everything. And once again, thank you for tuning in and checking this out. And now that I am 7 minutes into the episode, we're going to actually go ahead and start. 1492. Something happened in 1492 that's kind of major. The first kind of character that we're going to talk about this is Christopher Columbus, or Christopher Colon. He was an Italian guy who was hired by the Spanish Empire to sail 3 ships, take it across the sea. October 12th, 1492, after 33 days at sea, Columbus landed at what he named San Salvador. It was natively named the Guanahani. It's known today as San Salvador Island in the Bahamas. And you can look this up online if you're curious, but in what's called Landfall Park in Long Bay, in San Salvador, is like a big stone cross and a plaque that says this is where Columbus landed. So this is, boom, the first known European to land in the Americas. When he landed, he's meeting Taino or Arawak natives. That's different than what we're going to talk about. We're talking about a Spanish Empire meeting the Aztec Empire. That's the subject for what we're talking about today. But I have to kind of give the precedents that were set because it's important. When Columbus and his men landed there in the Bahamas on San Salvador, like I said, ran into Taino or Arawak Indians. He called them Indians. They didn't think they were going to India. It's kind of a common misconception that I remember from grade school. Indio was a word for foreign or exotic. So they called them Indians. And it was because they were exotic people, different foreign people. They didn't think they were in India or that they had found their way to the other side of the world. Proof of this, something that's kind of silly to think about is modern day India isn't known by Indian people as India. It's Bharat or Hindustan or, there's names for it. But if you're born in India, in your language, you're not calling it India. So they landed there. He claimed the land for Spain. Even though, again, he was an Italian, he was from Genoa. When they arrived, I believe they went to San Salvador, they went to the Dominican Republic, which is, Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, Haiti and Haiti. It's all one thing, and it's Hispania. It's the area. It's all connected. It's all kind of one thing, and it's kind of confusing to figure it all out. But the flagship, the Santa Maria, which Columbus was on, ran aground or ran into a reef. I don't know if that's technically aground. Ran into a reef, and they were kind of sinking, and natives came out and saved them, rescued them as the ship was sinking. Columbus took timbers left over and set up a Fort Navidad. And, this was kind of the first colonization of this area. Not even kind of, it is the known first one. There's stories about the cruelty of Columbus immediately, the expectations immediately of what they were going to do with the native people, how they were going to extort natural resources, all this stuff. Silver was a big thing. And basically, these guys are landing there and they're thinking jackpot, right? They find people who are not as technologically advanced and who are very giving and who don't really have the same sense of ownership and trade that the Europeans do. And so they see easygoing manpower, they see natural resources, and they see land. So they're thinking, they hit the jackpot. Basically, hell, this guy's the devil, and hell followed him, especially if you are Taino or from Haiti, or if you lived in Guanahani or, any of these places. Columbus wrote to Isabella, the Queen of Spain, and said, hey, this is here. There's some stuff. We should get it. There was a second voyage in 1493, but this wasn't 3 ships. This was a full fleet. It had masons, carpenters, soldiers, family, people who were going to now live in the new world, as it was. This is an excerpt from a letter that Columbus wrote to Isabella. Finally, to sum up in a few words, the chief results and advantages of our departure and speedy return, I make this promise to our most invincible sovereigns, the king and queen, that if I am supported by some little assistance from them, the king and queen, I will give them as much gold as they have need of, and in addition, spices, cotton, and mastic, which is found only in Chios, and as much aloes wood, and as many heathen slaves as their majesties may choose to demand. This is the first letter he wrote about. So obviously, and that's on the University of Austin, Texas website, that they knew what was going on. And that was kind of, those were the times. That's what was going on. We will learn more about slavery that existed in the Americas already prior to European arrival. This was something that was happening all over the place at the time. And it's very ugly, but it's reality. And it's a common theme, so get ready for that one. The primary source of this whole thing is a guy named Bernal Diaz del Castillo. Bernal, or Diaz was born in 1492. So he was born, like, imagine being an adventurous young man with not a whole lot going on, but you find out, hey, there's this place 33 days away and you could get rich. Like, yeah, you're going to go, you might risk it. You're thinking of wealth and opportunity. So you have to imagine that from the day he was born, he's hearing about this. It had to be just the talk of every town. He was in his mid-20s when we kind of get into the majority of the story. He left home at 18 for Colombia. He is the primary source of this. As I said, he had a vested interest in this whole endeavor, so he's going to want to make sure that the Spaniards and the voyages he was on were tip-top and just utterly morally just and totally righteous. But we'll see. What's fun about him is he beefs with other sources from the time, and I think that's interesting. He has a fascinating... There was the book, actually, that got me into this whole thing. It's on the Conquest of New Spain is the name of his book, and it's just kind of almost a journal from start to finish of this exact topic that we're going to talk about. It's up for free on Project Gutenberg online. If you're interested in it, you can find it anywhere, and it's pretty wild. But it's a day-to-day thing, so it's a very interesting read because we'll get to it soon, but you'll be amazed at some of the things that happen in the story. I will say, we'll save this for the end, but I have a nice sum up for him, but that's part of his end story. The next guy we need to talk about is a man named Diego Velázquez de Cuellar. He was the governor in Cuba, in Havana. So he is kind of top dog. He was the governor of the whole province, which makes him answer to the king, emperor, and the pope, and like a couple other guys who are kind of at the same rank as him, or so I understand it. Velasquez was kind of like, I don't know, he was kind of a Nepo guy, but not really. Like, he conquered Cuba, so he was kind of hot shit, but you'll see that he's just is stutter stepping the whole time. He's kind of questioning himself and kind of making these weird decisions, and there's stuff that like I can't find the answer for. I can't find the reason for, but we'll get there. But basically he's like this weird antagonist of this entire story, like from start to finish. But so remember, if I talk about the governor or Velasquez, it's this guy. Velasquez sets up a voyage from Cuba to the mainland. They know the mainland is there, but they haven't explored it yet. They haven't mapped the Gulf. They don't know what's up. January 1st, 1517, a guy named Francisco Hernandez de Cordoba, or I'm going to call him Cordoba, is given the charter to go and reach the mainland. Bernal Diaz, our main source, was with him. He was 24 at the time. And the governor chartered the journey and suggested taking natives as slaves in order to pay back the cost, because the governor paid for it. He was a pretty frugal guy. Diaz claims that, our source Diaz claims that all the men kind of laughed at him and refused, because and Velasquez kind of changed his mind, quote, realizing the wickedness of the governor's demands, we agreed it would be against God and king to take slaves. Now, based on Columbus's letter, and based on this, and this is 1517, we're 24 years later. I don't know. You know, I don't know if they really did that, or who knows. But this is one of the interesting things about this story is the motives are all very ambiguous. So the voyage actually left Cuba on February 8th, 1517. And on March 1st, the mainland of the Yucatan Peninsula was sighted. So if you look at a map, you look at Mexico, the Yucatan is the little peninsula that sticks up. That's what they sighted. That's where they landed. Some native Maya in that area, it's Maya, met the Spaniards in large, like single cutout canoes, right? Like chopped down a tree and then carve it out and smooth the sides, and it's a canoe. And they, this was the first instance, and this is also the first known European, to set foot on Mexico, or in Mexico, planned. We'll get to the other thing in a second. This first meeting, the natives kind of feigned friendliness and got them to shore, welcomed the Spaniards to shore, and then eventually ambushed the Spaniards, just started attacking them. There was immediately 13 wounded soldiers and 15 dead Maya. Just immediately. That's the first instance that we know of group. So, like end of Apocalypto, the ships are there, the natives come out, and they're just fighting immediately. Now, again, the source for this is Diaz. Maybe the fucking Spanish instigated something. We really don't know. But this is the source that we have, that we're going by, at least. What's interesting, though, is like they would like do this thing where they would go from the ships on boats, go to shore, and then go back and travel a little bit, and then like just kind of keep doing it, and they would keep making contacts with the natives as they were going along the coast, because people are seeing these ships from the shore, so they're going to check it out. And the pilot of the voyage believed that the peninsula was just an island. What's interesting about this one is the pilot for this was on Columbus's voyage. Like, a lot of these guys are like, they came over on the first couple voyages ever. So I can't even, like, probably some pretty grizzled dudes, you know? The Spaniards were always communicating with the natives via signs, and it's never really explained what these signs are. Like, how do you symbol to someone who doesn't even have the same social systems as you? Is like, do you have a king? Do you have a god? Like, we might suggest like pointing up, like, do you believe in a god or something? maybe these people think their god lives in the tree or lives under the ground or not necessarily in the sky. Why is the sky where God? You know what I mean? It's just like, I wish we could get more into that, but communication is going to be a big thing in this whole story, as you'll see. They were ambushed again a little later on while taking water. And during this ambush, Diaz took 3 arrows to his body, and the captain, Cordoba, took 10. 2 men were taken alive after the skirmish. That's a bummer. And the Spaniards fled then to Florida, which had been established in 1513. And they went and got water there, and the captain passed away. So like I said in the beginning, like, there are other contacts. There are other things that happen. Obviously, 1492 with Columbus, 1513, Ponce de Leon arrived in Florida. And what's interesting is when Ponce de Leon got there, they encountered natives who knew Castilian words. So the Spaniards spoke Castilian. It's a form of Spanish. I don't want to get too into that because I don't necessarily fully understand the differences or anything, but Diaz will often refer to the Spaniards as Castilian or Castilian, but then they will also call each other Spaniards. It's kind of tricky. So yeah, Ponce de Leon claims to have met natives there in Florida who knew Castilian words. And also something crazy that I found out too, just a little side note, is the Portuguese had met and had battles with the Chinese in 1511. So this is like truly the age of exploration. There's all this shit going on. We're just focusing on this one because I think it's the most interesting. The captain died in Florida. Charter decides to go back. At this time, go back to Cuba. At this time, other Spanish explorers had gone as far north as the Appalachians, which is crazy, up the east coast of the United States, present-day United States, and as far west as Texas. So they're kind of spreading out, but this is all like the first looks into these things, The second voyage was planned for about a year later. It's going to be led by a guy named Juan de Grijalva. April 8th, 1518. There were 4 ships this time. 3 of the 4 pilots were on Columbus's voyages, and then would later join kind of the main character who we're building up to, which is just crazy. I don't know, that's always interesting to me, that like a guy who sets sail from Seville, Spain, reaches the New World and probably goes back and then comes back is now like in the Caribbean and just and in the Gulf of Mexico just doing shit. Grijalva was related to the governor Velasquez. Velasquez was very much like pressured by his family to do certain things for the family. This is a common theme. This was going to be a similar voyage as the previous one to Cordoba, but they already kind of knew now to be like wary and careful, right? There was lots of trading this time, lots of customary gift giving. The Spaniards gave the natives these green beads, which resembled like a gemstone that they prized, but it was like an artificial, so it'd be like a cubit zirconia or something, like a fake diamond. But they didn't really know, they thought. Later reports will eventually told us that the other main character of this story knew of the Spaniards from this voyage, considered them formidable, but mostly traders. So the perception was that these guys were here to trade and not necessarily do bad things. They made their way westward along the Gulf and took on a voluntary native at the Ria Jamapa who joined them in going back to Cuba later on. Voluntary, again, we don't really know. At one point, the Spaniards traded a lot of these green beads for like a ton of these copper axes, thinking that the copper in the axes was like poor quality gold. It wasn't. They were just shitty copper axes, like soft axes that were essentially useless. Diaz claims at this time to have planted orange trees around. They would set up altars to the Virgin Mary and crosses and stuff. And there was one place where they set one up, and Diaz claims to have planted orange trees there. And he claims to be the reason why that fruit spread across the region. This is just a little tidbit that I find interesting. A greyhound was with them who was from, probably at this time from Cuba, but from Spain, you know what I mean? And was left behind because they had to leave in kind of a rush. There was another scuffle with natives. So they kind of went back, and it's same kind of thing. They like left as soon as they could. But the greyhound thing is just interesting. But he was left in Mexico. They returned to Cuba. The voyage brought in about 20,000 pesos, which is not a lot from what I'm understanding. Little tidbit about our this dude Grijalva. He was later killed by natives in Honduras in 1527. So that's dope. We are 28 minutes into this, and we're finally talking about our main character, Hernan Cortez. This is the ultimate bastard. This is the guy who more or less changed them. He was born from 4 lines of lesser nobility in Medellin, Spain in 1485. He left for Hispaniola, which is what this region was called, in 1519 at the age of 34 years old with little to no military background, which is, when we get into the thick of what goes on in Mexico with Cortez, it's fucking crazy that this guy is not like some general or something. It just doesn't make any sense. But it apparently is true. Again, imagine growing up, you're 7 years old when Columbus reaches the New World, right? So you're growing up, your family has like smaller connections. You're not quite a big noble or a big name. He didn't have a coat of arms. He wasn't hot shit yet, but there's a way, right? So maybe there's something he could do. Diaz writes about him. Here's a little description of him. He was of good stature and body, well-proportioned and stocky. The color of his face was somewhat gray, not very cheerful, and a longer face would have suited him more. His eyes seemed at times loving and at times grave and serious. His beard was black and sparse, as was his hair, which at the time he sported the same way as his beard. I don't know what that means. He had a high chest and a well-shaped back and was lean with a little belly. Diaz seems to like love this guy, not romantically, but like idolize him. That's kind of the vibe that I get. Our main source really, really fucks with Cortez. Cortez, in some way or another, had been involved in the conquest of Cuba. And Velasquez knew him via this. Okay. Fun or just interesting tidbit. Cortez was a second cousin to Francisco Pizarro, who conquered the Inca. So that's kind of crazy. So a third voyage was proposed, and there were several candidates that were possible for this. The governor, Velasquez, selected Cortez due to him like not being family. So like Velasquez thought he could trust Cortez to not like take his position because he wasn't a family member clawing at him. Like he was a guy who wanted his own stuff. I don't know. So Cortez was kind of selected in secret because of that. Cortez immediately started acting like hot shit. He's dressing different. He's kind of walking with an entourage at all time. He's only associating with upperclassmen and nobility in Cuba, like in the area. And the purpose of this voyage was kind of explicitly trade, mild exploration, and mapping the coast. That's the point. Okay, he did not have a charter to go to Tenochtitlan, which is the capital of Mexico, which we'll get to. Only mild trade, mild exploration, and mapping of the coast. Okay. At the last minute, due to the family pressures that I had mentioned, Velasquez changed the charter and sent a guy named Luis de Medina to replace Cortez. Cortez's brother-in-law may have intercepted him, and Luis de Medina may have been found dead. And the orders that he had on him from Velasquez made their way to Cortez. Okay. So on the day that they left, Cortez and Velasquez are like embracing each other and are like, I know you'll bring glory to the empire, and yes, thank you for your trust, and God be with you, and all this stuff. Bio con Dios, you know. And meanwhile, it's all for show because they know what the other did. And that plays like a movie. You know what I mean? That is fascinating to me. According to Hugh Thomas in his book Conquest, Cortez and the Fall of Mexico, as soon as the voyage left, as soon as Cortez and these guys on this third voyage set off to find Mexico, Velasquez again changed the charter officially, declared Cortez as a mutineer. So Hernan Cortez starts this whole thing as a mutineer. more or less a pirate. That's fucking crazy. It's crazy. So, February 10th, 1519, Hernan Cortez and the following set forth from Cuba to go straight to the Yucatan. We had 11 ships, 530 Spanish soldiers, and other soldiers, including African slaves, Cuban slaves, slaves from anywhere that they had been. 30 crossbowmen, 2 arquebus, which is kind of like it's like the first weapon with a trigger. It kind of looks like a musket mixed with a blunderbuss, kind of in the same way, but it's like a firearm. 2 conquistadores, which are like, I think from what I can find, it means they're like horse-mounted lancers, like we would depict with the breastplates and the helmets and a lance and just like the classic 16 horses and war dogs, including Irish wolfhounds and mastiffs. This is the fleet that's going now to the Yucatan. In Tabasco, at the mouth of the Grijalva River, named after the main homie from the second voyage, the Spaniards inquired with local natives about news of any other Spaniards in the area, which again is really fascinating to me. How would you ask that to someone who you don't even you have no phonetics, no sign language, not even nothing, no way to communicate. I just, how do you ask, like, you see anybody who looks like me? I don't know how you do that. But turns out, and this is what I was alluding to earlier with the first planned arrival in this area. In 1511, on their way back from Panama, a ship named the Santa Lucia wrecked, and about 13, I've seen like 13 to 20 landed on the shore in the Yucatan. A guy who we're going to talk about soon named Geronimo de Aguilar, or I'm going to call him Aguilar, and 12 others were captured, and they were to be sacrificed. 5 were sacrificed. Many others died until there was 2 men and 2 women left. The women were worked to death grinding corn, supposedly. Aguilar was sold into slavery, and this other guy named Guerrero, he was respected because he was a soldier, and he was eventually married, had children, and was giving prominence in the local village that he was a part of. Contact was first made with Geronimo de Aguilar, and he was brought to Cortez, and immediately Cortez saw a guy with a beard, and the natives didn't have beards. And he asked him, "Are you a Spaniard?" He said, "Yes, I am," and got all these details from him, and said there's another Gonzalo Guerrero. He also survived. So it was, okay, well, let's go get him. Couldn't just take the guy. Aguilar was a slave. Cortez had to buy his freedom from his master, from his owner. And they went to Guerrero to say, hey, we're here to rescue you. By the way, this was 1519, and the shipwreck was in 1511. It's 8 years. You're going to figure, yeah, if you got family and life and kids and new customs and you're just kind of feeling good, you're not going anywhere. And that's exactly what happened. He had a good life, and he said, no, I'm staying here, but you guys should leave. Something that had happened prior to this was, there's 2 interesting stories. When Cortez and his men reached the Yucatan, on the shore and from the ships, they were yelling, like, why did you live here? Why did you choose here? They're asking questions. Obviously, they're speaking in Spanish. Natives have no idea. They believe they heard the natives yelling back, Yucata, Yucata. Okay, I think I'm reading this. If I'm pronouncing things wrong, I'm so sorry, but that's just, I'm not a linguist. Cortez explains this to Aguilar, and there's 2. He says, well, depending on the dialect, that could either mean I don't know what you're saying, or it could be kind of a joke suggesting like, hey, your girlfriend's here or your wife's here. So basically a Spaniard who's standing up in a boat and like yelling, why are you here? Why are you here? One of the natives is like, hey, check it out, dude, your wife's here. Kind of like as a rib. And the Spaniards thought that was hilarious. So that's why it was named what it's named to this day. Supposedly that's how the story goes. Another thing that had happened is as before the first couple of weeks of this April 1519, the ships were spotted off this coast, and Aguilar was made aware of it, and he like ran and tried to like reach them and tried to, you know, get in contact with them, and he missed them. So imagine being, you know, a slave. He was traded up all along the coast to different masters. He learned different dialects. That's going to come into play. He learned the language, but all along he's wanting to return. He's wanting to go back home. He's wanting to be rescued. And 8 years you wait. You hear of a ship. You go to make it. You almost get there, and then they had just left. And he's like, oh my God. And then apparently the Spaniards had pulled off again. I think because one of the ships was leaking, and they were shoring it up and making sure it was all good to go. And then he finally found him. That's how it happened. But the big takeaway of this is now Cortez has a way to speak to the natives. And we're going to soon find out that language in this story is one of the most important fucking things. From start to finish, it's one of the most important things. Little tidbit, there's a statue of Guerrero in Acumal, Mexico today that is kind of in honors of him, because he not only did he choose to live with the natives who he was taken in by, he also fought for them later on in the story. All right, so the Spaniards are going up the Gulf. Like if you're looking at the Gulf of Mexico, start at the Yucatan, they're going up, right? They're going clockwise. March 1519, near Tabasco, a greyhound was found who promptly jumped into the boats and recognized Castilian. So
reasonably, this is a greyhound that was left behind on that last voyage. He found the Spaniards again because apparently he got into the boat and was like wagging his tail. He was very excited. So that's, according to Charles St. this was the first time and the first instance of the Maya or anyone who was seeing horses. He says the Indians thought at the time of the horse arrival were one creature they had never seen a horse before. This is what 1481. That's crazy. Imagine seeing that.
now, there was a battle near here where there's lots of these little battles that happen. And the Spaniards are kind of constantly getting roughed up, but always winning. Obviously, that's going to be iron and steel, armor, helmets, artillery, horses, tactics, you know, whatever. But it's constantly happening. Like they're always kind of wounded and limping away, but they're always winning. Because what will happen is they'll get into a battle. The natives will have serious casualties. Usually it's dozens dead. And then the Spaniards will have like 20 wounded and a horse wounded or something. But this keeps happening over and over and over again. After a battle in Tabasco, 20 women were given to Cortez as kind of a, you beat us, like here you go, like to make amends. Among these women was a lady named La Malinche, who would later be called Doña Marina. I'm going to call her Doña Marina for the majority of the story. At this time, they're hanging out in Tabasco, the Spaniards are. Doña Marina was actually given to another captain, not directly to Cortez, but some emissaries of the Aztecs. Aztecs are what we and others called these people. They were the Mexica. And the Mexica it's actually a triple alliance. I'll get into it, but they didn't call themselves Aztec. No one called them Aztec. This was like a later thing. But for the context of what we're doing and trying to make sure things are clear, I'm going to call them the Aztecs. Emissaries from the Aztecs, from the capital, arrived. And de Aguilar, the guy who was shipwrecked and who made his way back to the Spaniards, he couldn't understand them. So Cortez was kind of like, fuck, like here's these guys who are dressed different. They're clearly important. The locals are like bowing to them. I can't talk to them. What am I going to do? Turns out La Malinche, Doña Marina, she was from a certain place and was put into slavery and was sold and blah, blah, blah. She could speak that. She could also speak the same language as de Aguilar. and de Aguilar could then speak Spanish. So Malinche or Doña Marina spoke Nahuatl and Yucatec, which is Chotol Maya. Bear with me. De Aguilar could translate from Chotol Maya to Spanish. So, little game of telephone, but we have communication between Spain and the Triple Alliance Empire, the Aztec Empire. That's pretty insane. Like, this was the first story that I ever heard about this whole topic that kind of blew my mind. It was like, what? A shipwreck and then a lady and they could talk? But what are the odds of this happening? You had to... I said before that the Spaniards, they were obsessed with Christendom. They were obsessed with God. They were obsessed with spreading the word of the Virgin Mary. Like, all this stuff, they were obsessed. You have to think they were really starting to believe things when they were winning every battle, when they were being given gifts. Throughout all of this, they're given stuff constantly, like little works of gold and silver, food, incense, people. Like, they're given stuff the whole time. You have to start to think that, like, you're gonna think you're a god because they were treating you like it, and you think you're there on a mission from God. It's crazy. La Malinche, Doña Marina, kind of a sad story. I don't really know how to feel about her. There's a group of people who think that Cortez took her, raped her, she was his mistress. She did have a son named Martin by him. But then there's things throughout the story where she could have turned on him and she didn't. So it's a weird one. It's a weird one, but we'll get into it. There's a cool quote that I like that was just on the Wikipedia for this. And I didn't get the source for it. I'm sorry, but language was as powerful as canon. And that's like a cool aspect of this whole story, I think. In March of 1519, Cortez claimed the land for Spain, like officially, like this is now Spain. Melchior was a translator from a previous encounter of one of the previous voyages who fled and told the Tabasco natives in the first place before all of this happened, like, you should attack the Spaniards. Like, they're coming. They're no good. They're going to take over this whole place. And the Tabasco listened and they attacked the Spaniards. Cortez asked, can we see Melchior? Can we talk to that guy? And they said, oh, we sacrificed him. You can't. So he kind of got his comeuppance by both parties, if you really think about it, because he talked one group into fighting the other. They lost. And then he turned on this other group who took him in the first place. So I don't know. Weird one. We're going to talk a little more about Doña Marina. She would eventually learn Castilian. So de Aguilar wasn't quite as important, but we'll get to that again. I know I'm saying that a lot, but I just don't want to spoil stuff because it's an interesting story. Cortez learned through his two new interpreters now that there were local tribes and villages who despised the Triple Alliance and this man we're going to get to next by the name of Montezuma. Montezuma was, of course, the prince of the Aztecs. He was the head honcho in charge of the head honcho in charge, meaning a bunch of city-states were bound to him. 3 city-states were bound to him, but they were the big, powerful ones, and everyone else paid tribute to them. During this time in Tabasco, more and more emissaries visited, and Montezuma would not allow a meeting personally between Cortez and himself. But Cortez would protect these emissaries from some of the other places they were going to, like in Tobago. Those locals wanted to kill the emissaries because they hated the Aztecs so much, but Cortez protected them, seeing them as messengers, and it wouldn't be right, it wouldn't be just. And that kind of made Montezuma like, oh, okay, they're like good. But he really, the first like 200 pages in Diaz's book, he's saying like, no, we don't need to meet up. We'll just trade via these messengers. There's a weird thing where she mentions, Doña Marina mentions to her family, who she later returns way after all of this, and forgives them for selling her into slavery because there was a whole thing with a sibling of hers and who was going to be in charge, blah, blah, because she was kind of nobility in her own. She mentions being married to someone else via Cortez. Like she was given to someone and married to him, but she also had a son and was kind of Cortez's mistress too. She's an interesting one, and I don't really know how it really worked, but she's kind of like the third most important person in this, fourth maybe. So let's talk about Montezuma. His actual name is Moctezuma, which was, and you'll see it written as Moctezuma, and the Spaniards heard Montezuma. He was born in 1471. He was the fourth emperor. The Aztec Empire was so new. It was founded in 1428, and this is 1521. So it's not even 100 years has this been established. He was the emperor prince over the region for a short time, and it was really brand spanking new. His reign was like a disaster from start to finish. There were like natural disasters going on, and floods and droughts and rebellions and all this stuff. And although the Aztecs were like, if you paid your tribute, they were cool, but they would come and they would get people to sacrifice. They would come and just take stuff as well. And they would take, like, certain places had more obsidian, and obsidian is how they made all their weaponry, and they would just come and take. So they were kind of bastards, you know. There was a reason why other city-states in the area in Mexico, modern day Mexico, did not fuck with the Aztecs, did not fuck with Montezuma. Here's some more on the word Aztec. It would not have been used by the people themselves. It's only a modern usage. It has variously been used to refer to the Aztecs or the Triple Alliance, the Nahuatl-speaking people of central Mexico prior to the Spanish conquest, and specifically the Mexica ethnicity of the Nahuatl-speaking tribes. Okay, that's according to Michael Smith from the Aztec Migrations of Nahuatl Chronicles, Myth or History. Thank you, Michael. So he's kind of the other main cat, right? He's an obvious yin to someone's yang. I think probably the biggest yang is going to be the Spanish king and also the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. I think he was born Charles I, and then when he became the Holy Roman Empire, he changed his name. He was born in February 24th, 1500. So he's a young boy, basically. He's born in Flanders, which is kind of modern-day Belgium, to the Habsburg family. If you guys know who the Habsburgs were, they were fucking bastards. They had this thing called the Habsburg jaw. Eventually, it would be like kind of grotesque, and it would be all inbreeding and stuff because, you know, royalty and blah, blah. Look that up. Or if you want, if and when I do the video aspect to this, I'll include it. I have in my note, look at that mug, because the guy's just got a fucking jaw, like very Don Corleone. He was alive at the same time as Henry VIII. This is all it's all happening at the same time. His maternal grandmother was Isabella, who funded Columbus's journey to the Americas. So again, kind of a legacy at this point. By all accounts, the New World was relatively minor and trivial to his main focus. He was constantly at war, mostly with the Ottomans and other kingdoms at the time in Europe. All of this stuff happening in the New World was just kind of like, yeah, all right, fine. It was just not a major concern, which is crazy because, like, again, back to the alien thing, we think of, if aliens landed here, we must be such a priority. And they would be like, no, we're fighting wars in galaxies you guys don't even know about. And that's kind of the same perspective, and I just think that's really fascinating. He became the Holy Roman Empire June 28th, 1519, so right when all this was going on. He was married to Isabella of Portugal, and they had 7 kids. And he's the big guy in Europe. The Spaniards, and the Spanish Empire like kind of ran shit at this time. All right, so we're going to go back to the main portion. I'm looking at a map now of Cuba and where Cortez is going, and they're going eastward along Cuba over the Horn of the Yucatan, and they're kind of settling into right in the nook along the Gulf of Mexico. And if you're looking at Mexico, you'll see exactly where you would land if you were in charge of one of these ships. Further westward along the coast, emissaries of Montezuma arrived and met with Cortez and his translators, and they would paint pictures. This is crazy to me. So the emissaries would like paint a picture and then bring that picture back to Montezuma and be like, this is what's going on. So like, it's almost like taking a picture or recording a meeting, but this is what they had. That's crazy. And this was among the first instances where Cortez asked via his translators to the emissaries if Montezuma had gold, which the emissaries responded, yeah. And so his eyes are like, nee, 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 nee. The Spaniards were visiting and staying in Cholula, and there was a plot therein to betray the Spaniards to regain the favor of Montezuma, and the locals were. And Doña Marina discovered the plot because someone asked to marry her and said, like, hey, you're going to want to marry me because we're going to kill all the Spaniards, blah, blah. She told him. So this is one of those instances where you're like, man, if she hated her, I don't know, but then maybe she was afraid, she knew that the Spaniards couldn't be beat and that she would be better off and taken care of if she told, it's interesting. So because of that, they sacked the town and like the main area in Cholula for 2 days. Probably some bad stuff happened. I'm gonna guess. March 15th, 1519, they founded Veracruz. It's the same Veracruz that exists today, and they did something interesting here. Cortez was really clever. This is where he kind of starts to show how clever he was. He would let people kind of talk him into things. An option would be kind of in the air, and he would just kind of paw at it, and just kind of, well, if I wasn't bound to this charter, then we could really go and find all the riches in the world. But alas, here I am. And someone realized, well, hey, if we found a town and we set up a new mayor in this town, the way that Spanish law worked at the time is certain civilian elected officials would outrank military men. That's just how it worked. So a mayor could technically tell Cortez, don't worry about mapping and trading and your normal charter. I'm going to tell you what to do. So guess what they did? The men voted in this area where there's no buildings, there's no buildings, there's no people, there's kind of really nothing yet. They said, Mr. Cook, the cook of one of the ships, you're the mayor. And sure enough, the new mayor said, you know what? Don't worry about that charter. Go to Mexico. Find us some money. And Cortez says, you twisted my arm. I got to do it. Guys could see the writing on the wall, and she's like, oh my God, this is going to be forever. We just came here to find some quick money. We got some stuff that we traded. They're trading this whole time, constantly like getting whatever stuff. And they're like, we made some money. There was a group of men who were loyal still to the governor, to Velasquez, back in Cuba, who wanted to take a ship and return to Cuba. And again, Cortez allowed the guys who were kind of loyal to him to convince him, like, well, they can't return if we destroy the ships. And so he was like, very well, then I guess let's scuttle the ships. There's a misconception that they burned the ships. They didn't do that. They scuttled the ships, took the timbers to set up a fort in Veracruz. But we do get the expression now, like burning the ships means you're at the point of no return. You guys are here. And that takes a certain level of bravery and conviction. It just does. And fucking madness. Like that's, what are you going to do? It's wild. Basically it was like, we're going to continue and we're going to find glory or we're going to find death. And that's it. And so they burned the ships, quote unquote, burned the ships. Emissaries arrived at Veracruz and told Cortez that Montezuma was certain the Spanish were of, quote, his own race and had arrived, quote, as his ancestors had foretold. And Cortez and his men had the natives explain that they thought of them as gods or godlike beings. This was in Diaz's book, but people like Camilla Townsend think that that's likely false. That this is, again, kind of folklore almost at this point. So we have a town settled, a new charter, and everyone's fucking on board because there's nothing you can do. Some people were left in Veracruz, but the majority moved on out. According to Charles C. Mann in 1491, he says, weighing loss of such scale, one naturally wants to identify and denounce the responsible party. In the case of the Mexica, the obvious target is Hernan Cortez, who landed near what is now the city of Veracruz on April 22nd, 1519. An astute politician, that's really what he was. Cortez studied the Triple Alliance with a view to dismembering it. The empire, he quickly understood, was anything but unified, right, as we heard. Like Tawantinsuyu, it was a patchwork of satrapies rather than a unified state. Indeed, several large groups within the alliance had managed to hang on to their independence despite being surrounded by the hostile forces. And although the empire left the original elites of conquered lands in place, it humiliated them. The people, forced to disgorge ever-increasing tribute to Tenochtitlan, which is the capital of the Mexica, were resentful and bitter. Cortez divined the discontent beneath the alliance's martial display and would later benefit from it. So he's seeing, oh, there's people who don't fuck with the head guy. So if we recruit them, that's our avenue. Let's talk a little bit more about the head guy in the Triple Alliance. The Aztec Empire was, like I said, a triple alliance between Nahua city-states of Mexico, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. The alliance was founded in the wake of a territorial war, and it was less than 100 years old, like I said, and it was held together almost by like force, you know. The Aztec leadership didn't interfere with local politics at all. They didn't give a fuck as long as you paid tributary taxes. And they were probably going to come and steal people and goods from you anyway. We're getting into a new major component. In September 1519, Cortez and some native allies that they've been grabbing along the way, they arrive at Tlaxcala. After a series of 3 battles with the Tlaxcala, they found that these guys were like worthy adversaries. They were tough. They were kicking Spanish ass. They would do this thing where they would take their wounded or dead off the field no matter what, even if it meant someone else would get hurt trying to drag someone. They would throw dirt up into the air to kind of hide it. So the Spaniards never knew how many they were getting because they would get at the end of the battle after a retreat was made and there would be no Tlaxcala on the ground, which is sick. My notes say the Tlaxcala fucked up the Spaniards because really that's what it sounds like they did. The Spaniards were so bad off at one point that they were dressing their wounds with the fat of a stout Indian because they had no oil to clean wounds with, which I guess was the thing, but they would render fat off of this dead guy who they did find, and they would clean their wounds with it, according to Diaz. In one of these battles, Diaz was hit. However, out of all of them, 1 Spaniard would die and there would be 50 wounded. All of the horses were wounded, which there were 16 at the start. And the Spanish were fighting with every available man, regardless of sickness or injury. Cortez himself was like really sick at this point too. But they was just kind of like, hey, if you don't fight, we're all going to die. At one point, the Tlaxcala believed that the Spaniards were impervious during the day, so they could only be taken out at night. So they tried like a night battle, and that obviously also didn't work. Eventually, Tlaxcala made peace with the Spaniards, implying that the battle was almost like a test. And they hated the Mexica and Montezuma, and they had a common enemy together. So the Tlaxcala agreed to join the Spaniards and supposedly add to up to 100,000 men. Who knows if that's true or not? Some of the figures that are going to get used in the major conflict coming up blow my mind that many people were sustainable. But this is what we got. On the 23rd of that September, 1519, they arrived in the actual city of Tlaxcala, and they kind of like lick their wounds for a while. They chill out. They recover. They got new allies who are pretty powerful, and they fucking hate Montezuma, so that's chill. There's a cool little tidbit where the Tlaxcala had folk tales of giant men and women with like big bone, like giants, who inhabited their lands prior to the Tlaxcala arriving in that area. And they brought out a leg bone of one of these beings. It was like a femur bone that was as tall as a man. And that got sent to Charles V, the emperor, back in Spain. Couldn't find anything else about that, but that's in Diaz's book. And Montezuma found out that the Tlaxcala had sided with Cortez, and he was furious. But Cortez still wanted to meet with Montezuma, and the Tlaxcala were like, why would you want to do that? Let's just go get him. Why are you trying to meet with him? So he was kind of getting heat from both sides, but just said, like, we're going to Montezuma. So on their way from Tlaxcala to Tenochtitlan, which is, again, the capital of Mexico, which is modern day Mexico City, which is also called the city on the lake at the time. They're meeting with tribes all along the way and kind of gathering and building an army. Before entering the city, and this is a big moment, the Spaniards took extra precautions and prepared every weapon available, cleaned everything, got everything ready. Everyone was in whatever armor they could get. Everyone was ready for, we might get annihilated. This is kind of a big moment. There were all assortments of weapons, iron and steel and muskets, arquebus, horses and lances. The Tlaxcalan, Tlilihuitpitek, and the Huaxtochinco joined the Spaniards. Again, I apologize for butchering those words and names. There was like a special flower bridge. So this might be something that would be useful in a visual component of this podcast, but the city was built on a lake, literally on a lake. Man-made islands eventually were made, and the city, it was almost like Venice, but in Mexico. And so there's all these causeways and bridges to get into the other major sections. And this section, as they arrived, was covered with flowers. It was like a special, like, this is your arrival bridge as they're getting into the city of Tenochtitlan. On November 8th, 1519, Cortez and Montezuma meet and embrace for the first time. And how embrace, we don't really know what that means. Apparently, Cortez gave Montezuma a necklace of green beads called margaritas, and attempts to hug the king, but nearby, like, advisors and bodyguards, like, stop it, because it's indignant for the god king, the god emperor Montezuma, to touch whatever this guy is. Montezuma met him on the causeway, and Montezuma gave Cortez a gift of an Aztec calendar, one disc of crafted gold, and another of crafted silver, which Cortez later just melted down and traded for money. Now, again, we're still using de Aguilar and Doña Marina to talk to Montezuma, because what's crazy too is there's almost another translator was needed, because Montezuma spoke even a different type of language. He spoke like the highest nobility of language, and that had to go to an emissary, and then that had to go to La Malinche, Doña Marina, and then that had to go to de Aguilar, which then went to Cortez. So you can imagine some stuff is going to get lost in translation. And according to Matthew Restall, there were numerous instances of miscommunication, specifically regarding the first interaction between Cortez and Montezuma. There are also variations in the different accounts of this first contact, specifically between the two, as there was a difference in the accounts regarding whether or not Cortez was able to touch Montezuma when they first met or not. Doña Marina also was not always accurate in her translations, because she's playing like 6D chess. I don't know what she's doing, but it's crazy and it's very impressive. Her primary objective was to avoid war and also make the Spaniards happy, which was gold. So she's kind of working everybody in the room a little bit, you know what I mean? Which led to Marina and de Aguilar having numerous instances of miscommunication, which led to numerous different accounts of this actual interaction between the two. So it's kind of one of those, we think this is what happened, but we don't really know. According to Cortez, and this is from Camellia Townsend, Montezuma immediately volunteered to cede his entire realm to Charles V, the King of Spain, Holy Roman Empire. Some indigenous accounts written in the 1550s partially support this notion, but it's still unbelievable for a few reasons. People think that because Aztec rulers spoke an overly polite language, it needed translation for their subjects to understand. And that's not necessarily something that Doña Marina would be familiar with in the emissary. So again, basically they're saying, Montezuma said to Cortez, "You have come here to sit on your seat of authority, which I have kept for a while for you." And it's kind of like, "Oh, I'm here to claim this land for Spain," and Montezuma's saying, "Of course you are. Of course you are. I understand." Is kind of what it feels like. But it's just interesting how important language is in this thing. But Montezuma is the takeaway is it's not hostile. And that's for better or for worse. The Spaniards were given lodging and a tour of the city. They were shown an aviary, a sacrificial temple, working craftsmen and women, and markets. They were shown the vastness of the city. And this was a city. This was the point of this whole thing, where someone from Madrid or Barcelona, if they existed at the time, I'm not sure, or Seville or Medellin, they come here and they see something that they would say a city. This is a city, not a town, not a village. This is a proper city. Cortez contemplated asking for a church to be built immediately on this very day. And word kind of got around to Montezuma, and he was offended after having shown the Spaniards their gods, and Cortez was talked out of it, saying, let's wait for the god stuff. There's a lot of fucking people here. I don't know what the Tlaxcala or other allies of Cortez are doing at this point. Doesn't really say, or I haven't found what they're doing. It's probably out there somewhere. November 14, 1519. Cortez met with Montezuma, as they often did, but this time Cortez brought with him 30 men and accused the king, Montezuma, for the deaths of Spaniards along the coast who had been attacked while attempting to make and eventually aid them in Tenochtitlan. So more men had come from Hispaniola, from Cuba, who had been attacked and killed. Cortez apparently blamed Montezuma for that. It's kind of more or less an excuse to take him as a captive. And Montezuma just kind of goes with it. And Cortez, surprised by the cooperation from Montezuma, allowed him to leave immediate captivity because he's like, oh, this guy he's just like cool with it. And Montezuma essentially began ruling his empire as a prisoner by Cortez. So it was like Cortez would tell him something and Montezuma would tell them something. Just weird stuff. There was contacts constantly coming in from the coast of other people under the rule of Montezuma. And in April of 1520, so we go from November 1519 to April of the next year. So 6 months or so chilling in Mexico City. Cortez was told by Montezuma that a man named Dean Narvaez was sent from Cuba via Velasquez, the same governor, to find and kill Cortez, and he brought with him 19 ships, 1,400 Spanish soldiers. So that same month, Cortez says, well, I got to go get him. Leaves the city. He takes Doña Marina with him. He takes I think half as many men, like 700 men with him, and kind of leave the men in Mexico City without like a real translation system and kind of underpowered, and it's a little odd. Cortez reached him, by him I mean Narvaez, by May of that year, so April to May, at the Battle of Cempoala. Narvaez lost an eye and was taken prisoner. After 2 years in prison, he was returned to Spain. So he just kind of fucked up. And again, it's just like, how is Cortez constantly doing this? He's constantly winning, and he's not like a military-minded guy that we know of, that we're told. Cortez returned to Tenochtitlan in 1520, along with 1,300 soldiers from this Narvaez fella, 96 horses, and 2,000 more Tlaxcalan warriors. Cortez convinced the other soldiers who were there to kill him that, hey, there's gold in Tenochtitlan. Like, let's go. Like, you guys you're going to get some. Like, come with. And they said, yeah, all right, fuck it. So all of a sudden, Cortez has kind of like doubled his force, if not more. And they start to make their way back to Tenochtitlan. In the meantime, a guy named Alvarado was in charge. Alvarado's a real bastard. We don't like him. We don't like any of these guys, but this guy's a real bastard. Alvarado was capturing citizens, torturing citizens because they were constantly afraid of plots to kill them. There was a festival feast going on at the time. There's a guy on YouTube named Roy Casagranda who has a lecture on this, and it's really interesting, but I found out that he kind of embellishes stories and just kind of like says stuff without any real bias, or I'm sorry, without any real basis or sources or anything, but then he does source stuff. So I don't know. I'm going to give you everything that I've found and we can kind of go from there. According to Roy Casagranda, it was a year anniversary after the Aztecs defeating the Cholula. So a thing prior to the Spaniards. And therefore, a year after you were captured, based on Aztec customs at the time, you were going to be sacrificed on the year anniversary. So these innocent to the Spanish people ran up the pyramid steps. They're put on their backs. A knife goes into their chest. Their heart is cut out. Their arms, legs, and heads are cut off, and they're thrown on various sides. According to Casagranda, this sent the Spaniards completely over the edge. There's another account that Alvarado just kind of decided, fuck it, set up men in strategic points and attacked a festival of peaceful festival goers and killed about 3,000 people in the Temple Massacre. Most of the nobility died. Cortez, so there's two different accounts of this. Cortez returned to Tenochtitlan shortly after this to a silent Tenochtitlan, and he was like, what the hell's going on? But then again, according to Casagranda, he returned to his men fighting their way out of the city. And like he kind of like came up to the backs of his retreating men, and there he learned about what had happened and was like, what the fuck? It's kind of sketchy. But basically, according to Diaz, which again is kind of our primary source, that after this massacre at the temple, there were a bunch of skirmishes and mini revolts and stuff going on by the Mexican populace. The Spaniards had Montezuma address his countrymen from the rooftop of his palace in order to urge them to cease violence and to stand down and to not do this. So again, you have Montezuma at the rooftop of a pyramid-esque palace addressing his people with conquistadors behind him, kind of with a knife in his back, being like, tell him to fucking chill out. And according to Diaz, on June 29th, 1520, the moment his speech finished, rocks and darts struck Montezuma. The second he said, like, thank you, he got hit by rocks and darts and was killed. That's according to Diaz. According to Diego Durin, they said they just stabbed Montezuma. That the Spaniards who were still there before Cortez got back were just like, can you fix this? And they didn't really understand each other because, again, no translator, killed him. And then according to Townsend, and in the Annals of the Aztecs, which is a publication, it claims that Montezuma was found strangled to death in his palace. So we don't really know. Diaz says the speech thing. I think that's the most dramatic thing, and therefore I think that's the most interesting. But that also, you know what that does, right, is it shifts the blame from, so, well, his own people wanted to kill him, so whatever. So it kind of, it's a little slimy. So I'll leave that up to you. Whatever you think happened, probably, maybe did or didn't. July 1st, 1520, there's full-on revolt. Cuauhtémoc was now in charge of the Mexica. There was Montezuma and then another guy who quickly died or went away, and then Cuauhtemoc, was now in charge of Mexico, and he was full on fight because an interesting that it happened. The Aztec considered life sacred and blood sacred. It was a gift for the gods, and this could be folklore, who knows? But prior to this, the Aztec weren't really fighting the Spaniards with weapons; they were just kind of wrestling, and the Spaniards were not doing the same, obviously. But Cuauhtemoc said, "Fuck you." Get the good stuff, got their obsidian blades, got all the Jaguar and Eagle warriors all suited up, and they had a full-on battle. And this is when shit really hits the fan. This is a full-on, oh my God, moment. We're going to talk a little bit about Jaguar warriors and the Eagle warriors. The Jaguar warriors were Aztec warriors. They were kind of like a SEALs team. They were specialized, and they were kind of like an elite force, but then the Eagle warriors were like a Delta force. They were like more feared, more elite. They had crazy uniforms, but these were just a cool color that's added to this whole painting about this whole thing. And I always found that fascinating. On La Noche Triste, or the Night of Sorrows, that is when a full-scale battle starts happening in Tenochtitlan. It's almost the same day as Montezuma's death. It's like over a weekend. That's a bad weekend. They're basically fleeing. Cortez sacrifices his rear guard, which is like a couple hundred men, lots of gold, lots of artillery, blah, 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 to get out of the city, and almost doesn't make it. They lost 870 men total, but they made it to friendly Tlaxcala. So they got there. Right around the same time, more reinforcements come from Cuba. And again, the Spanish are using Tlaxcala, the city, to lick their wounds and recuperate. During this time that they're kind of hanging out, so we go from July 1520 to January 1521. So they're there for quite a while. Cortez starts doing like another recruitment thing, and he's going around and he's getting more natives who are not on board with the Aztecs and the new leader, Cuauhtemoc, and he's building up an army again. Cortez discovers a plan to have him assassinated by one of his own men. And the guy's name Antonio de Villafana. Cortez just hears about it and has him hanged. This guy is he's very lucky. He's just I don't know how else to describe it, but it's fascinating to me. Finally, Cortez, gathers enough of a force and decides to go back. But another thing happens along the way. In between that July and January 1520 to 1521, in about September 1520, there's a huge smallpox outbreak in Tenochtitlan. There's a crazy one that supposedly lasts for 70 days and leaves a ton of people dead. So that's fucking nuts. The Spanish and Tlaxcalan allies begin taking cities one by one to kind of encircle the capital. And in May 1521, a war of total attrition was started on the city. And the first move was to just cut off fresh water. They're on a lake, but they're on a lake that's been fished to death. It's probably used for unsanitary stuff. It's probably not clean water. It's brackish, maybe polluted or whatever. And then they cut off the clean water, so people are drinking this lake water. That's not good. There's dysentery going around. That's not good. There's smallpox going around. And that's really not good. They can grow food. They have floating nurseries on the lakes, kind of all around. But that it doesn't grow that fast. And this is a city of tens of thousands of people. This battle, this war for Tenochtitlan begins. Supposedly, there's 200,000 native allies with the Spanish, 900 to 1,300 Spanish infantry, about 100 cavalry, 16 cannons, and 13 lake brigantines. Cortez decided, well, it's a city on a lake, and we need to be able to move and bring supplies forward with us, but we can't through these lakes, so let's build ships, small little sloops, and we'll get them, So they build 13 ships, which is crazy. And they're up against about 80,000 Aztec warriors and 400 war canoes. And a war canoe just sounds cool. I don't really know much more about that, but that sounds really sick. The brigantines were used to create strategic hold points and to give some mobility, like I said, for supplies. There was 25 soldiers per sloop, 12 oarsmen, 12 musketeers, 12 crossbowmen, and a captain per ship, so per 13. And now a major thing that happened was supplies began coming from Cuba and then to Veracruz, and then from Veracruz to Tenochtitlan to the Spaniards. The governor, Velasquez, back in Cuba, he knows, like, well, shit, if they take over Mexico and I can't say that I helped, that's not going to look good. Like, I gotta be a part of this some way or another, which is just crazy that, like, there's this guy who he's trying to kill, Cortez, and he can't kill him. He can't get it to happen. It's just wild. Cortez was injured really bad during one of these battles, but a guy named Cristobal de Oleg and Cristobal de Guzman gave their lives to protect him, along with 65 other guys, to kind of block. Cortez got away, and they were taken, prisoner. Interesting thing about Cortez, I've said a few times that he's not like a military guy, but even prior to this, when they were gathering troops, there was a battle at Otumba. Cortez, like, single-handedly got victory by defeating an Aztec commander who was in a colorful headdress, and you could just kind of see him on the battlefield, rode him down, killed him, and ended the battle. So again, this guy who's like not really a soldier, it's just... So these 65 guys who were captured, along with 5 others who were captured, they were sacrificed. And here's a quote from Diaz. This one's pretty gruesome. Diaz relates, the dismal drum of Huicachobos sounded again. We saw our comrades who had been captured in Cortez's defeat when he was protected and got away. They were being dragged up the steps to be sacrificed. Cutting open their chests drew out their palpitating hearts, which they offered to the idols. The Indian butchers cut off their arms and legs. Then they ate their flesh with a sauce of peppers and tomatoes, throwing their trunks and entrails to the lions and tigers, serpents and snakes. They sent the hands and the feet of our soldiers and the skin of their faces to the towns of our allies. The Aztecs sacrificed a batch of Spanish prisoners each night for 10 nights. I think lions and tigers are mountain lions, like pumas and jaguars. That's pretty gnarly. So imagine being in this and, like, that's what happens if you get captured. Pretty wild. This whole siege lasted 8 months. It was not immediately successful. The Aztecs and their war canoes were, like, really powerful and strategically were kind of kicking ass. On October 13th, 1521, the cousin of Montezuma, Cuauhtemoc, he hadn't died yet, but he does eventually die of smallpox. He was stubborn and he would never surrender, but eventually he did surrender the empire to Cortez, and he was trying to escape on a canoe. He was trying to get out of the city, but they got him, and they got him to surrender. And so that's August 13th, 1521, Cortez officially takes the city for Spain. Here's some more destruction from this battle. Cortez then ordered the idols of the Aztec gods and the temples to be taken down and replaced with icons of Christianity. He also announced that the temple would never again be used for human sacrifice. Human sacrifice and reports of cannibalism, common among the natives of the Aztec Empire, had been a major reason motivating Cortez and encouraging his soldiers to avoid surrender while fighting to the death. That makes sense. I don't want that to happen to me. And if I'm stuck in a place, sure, I'll fight to get out. And then also, if I'm on the other side of that coin, if I'm an Aztec, yeah, I'll sacrifice your guys. Get the fuck out of here, dude. I get that. Tenochtitlan was almost completely destroyed by the Tlaxcalan warriors after the battle and cannon fire during the siege. The foundations for modern day Mexico City were started immediately. Like as soon as this aftermath was beginning, boom. Mexico City was essentially founded. The surviving Aztecs were forbidden from living within the city islands and were banished to Tlatelolco. Cortez wanted to preserve and show the city to the king and tried several times to offer diplomacy, supposedly, during all of this, but It really got destroyed and got fucked up. And there's a cool little tidbit where the Aztecs in defeat were throwing cooked limbs of prisoners to the Tlaxcalans, of Spanish prisoners, saying, "Eat the flesh of these Teules, gods, and of your brothers, because we are sated with it. We've eaten enough." Here. Pretty crazy. Of the 240,000, I have to make sure that this is right. I have 240,000. Maybe it's 24,000, but it said 200,000. About 200 remained. The rest either left during and said, fuck this, or had died during all of it. One interesting thing that happens during this is during one of the final days of the battle, a tornado struck the basin over Tlatelolco, which is where the Aztecs were banished to, and then moved over one of the lakes on the city. And this was the first known tornado seen by Europeans in the Americas. Isn't that crazy? Again, the coincidences of just like the what? So imagine seeing that, and while a city is being destroyed and essentially an entire people are being taken as prisoner or subjects. Bernal Diaz expressed that he was a bit remorseful after the sacking of Tenochtitlan. He later said in his book, The True History of the Conquest of New Spain, which is just kind of this source, but with some more stuff added on, that the natives have showered them with gifts and given them rooms and food, and he was dazzled by the gardens and the canals that flowed around the city. Quote, "When I beheld the scenes around me, I thought within myself, this was the garden of the world. All of the wonders I beheld that day, nothing now remains. All is overthrown and lost." Cortez was pretty vengeful at this point. He allowed the survivors to eat rations and drink brackish water and did not treat them very well. They were mostly really shitty, but they didn't want everyone to die because they needed people to work, which is not, again, no real morality there, but, you know, they didn't want everyone to die. But again, dysentery was rampant. Smallpox was still rampant. Cuauhtemoc, the new leader, after he was captured on that canoe, was brought before Cortez, and he was tortured by having his feet burned with hot oil until he confessed to leaving vast amounts of gold in the various lakes around it on his escape, thinking maybe he could come back for it later. He was like left as the unofficial leader of Tenochtitlan, as like kind of a face, until he was hanged for his treasons in 1521. August 13, 1521, 29 years after Columbus landed in the Bahamas, the city was renamed Mexico City. The Tlaxcalans continued to massacre even after the siege was over. And this was bad. There was robbery, rape, murder, theft, all just terrible stuff. Cortez wrote to Isabella about the Tlaxcalans after this siege. He said, "We had more trouble in preventing our allies from killing with such cruelty than we had in fighting the enemy. For no race, however savage, has ever practiced such fierce and unnatural cruelty as the natives of these parts. Our allies also took many spoils that day, which we were unable to prevent, as they numbered more than 150,000, and we Spaniards only some 900. Neither our precautions nor our warnings could stop their looting, though we did all we could. I had posted Spaniards in every street so that when the people began to come out to surrender, they might prevent our allies from killing those wretched people, whose numbers were uncountable. I also told the captains of our allies that on no account should any of those people be slain, but there were so many that we could not prevent more than 15,000 being killed and sacrificed that day by the Tlaxcalans." Is that true? I don't know. He wrote it, you know, Cortez wrote that. The total casualties of this 8-month siege was between 450 to 860 Spanish, about 20,000 Tlaxcalans or Tlaxcaltecs. On the Aztec side, 100,000 killed in action, 300 war canoes sunk. At least 40,000 Aztec civilians were killed and captured during this aftermath. There's other sources that claim from 100,000 to, other sources claim that between 100,000 to 240,000 were killed in the campaign overall, including warriors and civilians. And that's according to Charles Robinson in the Spanish Invasion of Mexico. Basically, It was devastation. It was horrible. We're kind of winding down now. We've had our climax of the story. We had our big moments and our big drama, and now we're kind of winding down. Between 1521 and 1524, Cortez personally governed the city and therefore the empire. He received a royal coat of arms for the conquest. It's almost the highest honor you can get. I'm looking at it, and it looks like shit. And it was just like a bird and a lion and some crowns. After this, it began like the Christian brainwashing and spiritual conquests of this region. We're kind of done with the story. So that's kind of what happened. Somehow this little fucker made it and is governing and has victory. He eventually leaves in 1524 to continue other conquests. I'm going to give you kind of the end credits now. This is we're at the end of our story. There's no real, like I said, there's no real big payoff. This is just kind of a grueling, like, damn, that happens. His final title is Hernan Cortés de Monroy y Pizarro Altamirano, the first Marquis of the Valley of Oaxaca. His other conquests after this, he went as far as Baja California. He would eventually return to Spain. He was broke. He returned to Mexico in 1547. He eventually died of dysentery and basically pneumonia at the age of 62 on December 2nd, 1547. So he died shitting himself, which is pretty fitting, I would say. His son Martin, and whose mother was again Doña Marina, was legitimized by the Pope, and as were 3 other of his kids. In 1566, his body was sent to New Spain and buried in the church of San Francisco de Texcoco, where his mother and one of his sisters were also buried. So that's Cortez. He kind of, I don't know. He had a name. He's infamous for sure, but he didn't really amount. You know, he didn't really. He was broke. A lot worse should have happened to him, but at least something bad did. He died shitting. La Malinche, or Doña Marina, she stayed in a house that Cortez built for her in the town of Coyoacan, 8 miles south of Tenochtitlan. So basically, she kind of went off and kind of lived on her own, I guess. She died sometime before February 1529, so she didn't live much longer after all this stuff. The term La Minchista refers to a disloyal compatriot, especially in Mexico, which is believed to be tied to her, which is interesting. What about King Charles? He was, the king of the first time the term was ever used, that the sun never sets on so-and-so, was actually this Spanish Empire, his Spanish Empire. And yet, again, so much was going on during that this was barely a ripple to him. This was just kind of a thing happening on the other side of the world. During all of this, you have to keep in mind that Martin Luther happened on Halloween 1517. Leonardo da Vinci died the same month that Cortez arrived. Like, there's lots of things going on in Europe at the same time. And then there's constant wars with the Ottomans, all kinds of stuff going on. Charles died with extreme gout and of malaria on September 21st, Colin's birthday, 1558, while holding in his hand the cross that his wife Isabella had been holding when she died. He had retired and abdicated of his throne. He was a bastard, and he died of the royal disease, right? Isn't that what they call it? Gout. De Aguilar lived in Mexico City until 1531, and he just died. We don't really know much of what happened to him. Velázquez, that antagonist to Cortez, never financially recovered from the fleet that went with Narvaez to capture Cortez. That last attempt to stop him. He lost face in the region and was nearly replaced by his kind of immediate overseer, Diego Colón, who was the viceroy to the Indies and the first son of Columbus, which is interesting. He and Cortez remained at odds indefinitely. They were always just butting heads. His health began to decline in 1523, and June 11th, 1524, he died. Alvarado, he was that bastard who was in charge while Cortez was away and who killed all the people in the Temple Massacre. He participated in a prior conquest of Cuba and the Gulf of Mexico. He was a conquistador. He is considered the conquistador of much of Central America, including Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and parts of Nicaragua. He tried to squash a revolt by the Mixton natives in modern Guadalajara, but he was crushed by a horse and lied in agony for days. That's nice. He died on the 4th of July, 1541, at the age of 55, hopefully underneath that horse. You know what I mean? Bernal Diaz, our main source here. He was a soldier of fortune. He had conquered, Cuba, much of Mexico, and eventually was the governor of Guatemala. He wrote most of this journal, most of this source, he wrote 30 years after the event. And he kind of expanded on them based on Cortez's letters to the king. Again, I think this guy's painting a prettier picture than we really got. Bernal Diaz took issue with other works and biographies which applauded Cortez too much without giving credit to the soldiers. So he's a real working man's bastard. Diaz also took issue with a historical account published by the monk Sahagún, which he found to be overly sympathetic to the indigenous Americas and the Aztecs in particular. So Diaz went out saying, hey, these guys were savages. And, I'm quoting him by imagination. He died in Guatemala at the age of 92 in 1584, which is fucking crazy. To go through all the shit that he went through, 3 voyages, and then the conquest of Mexico, Guatemala, all this shit he's doing. 1584, he lived till 92. That's wild. Like I said before, there's really no good place to stop with this. There's, of course, so much more that happens afterwards and so much that happened prior, but this is just a moment where the telescope kind of swings around, and I like the view, and I just wanted to kind of talk about that. This is when we would roll the credits. So shortly thereafter this, there was a debate between a guy named De las Casas and a guy named Sepulveda, where De las Casas, who was very sympathetic to the American natives, wanted to convince the crown and kind of a council that they should stop. In the beginning of his life, he advocated for using African slaves instead, because that already existed. He later recanted that and said, no, slavery is good, all in all. He had this debate. It kind of didn't go anywhere, and no real decision was made, but it was a major, it was one of the first major moral questionings of, hey, should we be doing this? Which I think is worth mentioning. And that's kind of where we are. That's kind of the end of the story. Just shy of about 2 hours. And I think that's just about right. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I had fun. I think that maybe there's other things I could have expanded on and other stuff. If you have ideas for something you've always wanted to learn about or something along this theme that you might find interesting, let me know. Thank you for checking it out. Thank you for listening. And I hope you had fun. And I hope you'll come back next time. Thanks.
There is not one truth cast in a stone, only lies cast in a flame.